We wanted to bring you up to date with the latest on where a potential economic stimulus is heading. And I mean, frankly, Saagar, yesterday we got more insight into kind of what a mess it is.
It's a total S show. I'll leave it at that. I have no other way to describe it. So Rand Paul pulled his same shtick as normal. He's like, I don't know what meeting I was in again. This is the big spending, big government meeting. Now,
Dude,
my goal...
You're not even funny here.
It's not even funny. My goal is to make it so that Rand Paul has no party. So he just feels rudderless in the United States Senate, and everybody shuns him as he should be shunned. And it's like, it's just so ridiculous. He said the exact same thing last week, but I think Hawley actually emerging from the same meeting kind of put it best, which is that they're like, it's a mess. I can't figure out what the bill is about. It's not going to be in the bill. They're going to negotiate with Pelosi. We have no idea what the final will be, and we'll be the last to know. It just goes to show you how every basic member of the caucus is frustrated because McConnell and them only have one red line. Liability protection, right?
Right.
I think we have that there. He said that yesterday. He was like, there is zero chance that this will get back to normal without the liability protection. Outside of that, nobody really agrees on anything. They don't agree on the unemployment checks, even at $200 a week. That's too much for some, not enough for others. On the state and local aid, Jeff Stein was telling us about this, and I did a little digging into this, and I figured it out. There's a lot of unspent money that was appropriated to state and locals last time around, which has some restrictions on it, hence why it hasn't been spent.
Right.
Some Republicans want to impose very onerous restrictions on that to ensure that it doesn't go to things that they don't want. Some in the Republican caucus and most of the Democratic caucus wants flexibility on that money,
right,
so that they can spend it on other things. But again, they don't even agree on that. So there's nothing that is agreed upon. And I could not tell you what is going to be in the final bill, except probably stimulus checks, which is good.
Yes.
We have no idea what the unemployment insurance payments are going to be. I just saw Rob Portman being like, maybe we could move above 200. I don't see it. I don't see that. I don't see people in the Republican caucus going for it.
And this is just in the GOP caucus.
This is just the GOP.
This is not even like signed off on by the White House.
Oh, well, the White House is irrelevant. They're just kind of like, yeah, whatever. Like, we want a payroll tax, but then they just nuked that. And they're like, well, we don't really know what we're doing. I mean.
But then McConnell says that Meadows and Mnuchin are the ones who are supposed to talk to the Democrats.
Right.
I mean, so we haven't even gotten to the Democratic side of the equation, although I do want to point out on the corporate liability shield that we've been talking about here, it's a great David Sirota find. John Cornyn, the liability piece that is put into this bill, he literally copied and pasted it from Andrew Cuomo, Democratic resistance hero governor of New York, from his corporate liability protection. So it just shows you again where the parties actually overlap. And one other note on the corporate liability shield, which I've been saying from the beginning, is like the one thing that they're absolutely clear that they want to get. The White House is aligned, the GOP caucus is aligned. Democrats say that they don't want it, but have they drawn a red line to say absolutely no? Of course they haven't. And it's kind of, at this point, is kind of a fake issue because people haven't actually brought these suits, but corporations want to make sure that they are totally covered here, that their interests are protected. Everybody else's interests, who knows what's ultimately going to happen here. On the Democratic side, no heroes there either. First, you had Steny Hoyer come out and be like, well, we like to see the $600 plus up on unemployment, but it's not really a red line. We got more reporting that perhaps the $600 is a red line for Democrats, but not the state and local aid, as we've been covering here. That state and local aid piece is really, really critical because without states and local communities being able to pay their bills, you could be looking at mass layoffs from that as well. So the fact that Republicans can't even agree on providing states with flexibility, let alone any additional funding, it looks very much like if Democrats aren't going to fight for it, that is unlikely to be in the bill. So that could have massive implications here moving forward.
Here's the other thing. If Pelosi and Schumer don't say that on camera, I don't really believe it's a red line, right? You know, this is according to Meadows and Mnuchin. They're coming out being like, well, they said X. But if they're not putting themselves out on the chop, like McConnell has been out there from day one being like, no, this thing is going to have liability.
The corporate liability shield will be in there.
I have not heard Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer say this bill will not pass unless there is $600 a week on unemployment, which very much tells me that they're open to negotiation. I just think that we're a week out from them being like, okay, we can do 400, and then we'll end up at like 350 or something like that. that. And still half the Republican caucus will vote against it. But all of this is about priorities. We're haggling over tiny amounts of money, even in the first place. We're not talking about back to work payments. We're not talking about hazard pay. We're not talking about eviction moratoriums as much, forbearance. I mean, so many of the things that are critical to so many millions of Americans are just outside of the bounds of both parties in their discussion.
Even what the conversation is.
And so at that point, this is why I despair for this bill, which is, $1,200 check, great. Okay, great. It's fine. Should have been many of them should have happened before. But the real priorities for workers and for Americans right now is so much bigger than that.
Yeah.
That I think it's going to be screwed. I think it's bad.
Well, and where's anyone fighting for, hey, instead of doing a one-off stimulus payment, why don't we tie it to economic conditions so that people have some predictability and they know that they're going to continue getting checks until that we get past this thing, so that they can stay in their homes and stay in their apartments. No one's fighting for that. The Democrats have literally not signaled willingness to fight on one single thing. Not one single thing. They are perfectly happy to sit back and watch the, Republican-esque show, as you put it.
Yeah.
For them, that benefits them politically. They're happy to watch it unfold, and they don't really care that much about the consequences ultimately because they think it's politically good for them. So that's why you're hearing so little from them. On the other side, you've got Lindsey Graham says they'll be lucky if they get half of the Republican caucus to go along with this much money. But what I don't hear complaints about is some of the extra bells and whistles that have gotten thrown into this. They complain all about the money that goes to working people. Meanwhile, they stuck $30 billion into this bill. It's described here by The Hill as for the Pentagon. It's really for the defense contractors. It's like Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all of them need to make sure that their weapon systems and their jets are all still getting produced and still getting funded. So they put that in the bill. Of course, they put in the money for the FBI building, all this stuff. I don't hear them complaining about any of that. The only thing that they complain about is the money that could actually help keep our economy floating, by the way, and help working people be able to get through this moment.
Yeah, that is exactly it, right? They have lots of pork in the thing. They're willing to stick all that. But on the unemployment, nope, got to cut that with some fake economic theory. And then and look, I believe some of the theory on the unemployment checks, but then you have to make up lost income. You have to. And they refuse to do it in this particular case, which just gives away the worst faith of their argument and the bad faith of the approach from the very beginning. And Trump doesn't help, right? I mean, the White House is completely irrelevant in this entire process. The president said yesterday that this bill is, quote, semi-irrelevant because it still has not been negotiated with Pelosi and Schumer. It's like, what? In past times of crisis, like during the New Deal, even during Hoover, Hoover was a terrible president. They wrote the bills in the White House, and then they whipped votes on Capitol Hill. They were constantly on the phone. LBJ, many of these other people, were calling senators and Republicans to be like, you got to vote for this thing. What do you need in order to make this work? Do we know what Donald Trump's priorities for the stimulus package are?
No clue.
Zero idea.
No
Literally
clue.
zero.
I know his priority's been like putting Art Laffer on speakerphone in meetings about it.
Even then, they said cut the payroll tax, and the Republican senators were like, no. And they're like, okay, they just dropped it. Fine. They had no priorities whatsoever. The organized members of the Senate caucus are the only ones who were able to get what they wanted. And this is what happens. I mean, it's like the presidency is irrelevant when it's supposed to be the most powerful negotiating tool in the world. It's just an abdication of leadership.
Yeah,
completely.
I mean, Barack Obama got some criticism in the same regard during his presidency, that he would kind of sit back and he didn't like to strike up those personal relations. He hated DC. He hated the political game, the backslapping. He hated all of that. But even he was way more involved than this. I mean, you think about Obamacare.
Yeah, he
was deeply involved in the crafting of that and all the provisions and whether it had a public option or not. All of the stimulus, he was really involved with those things, and I think rightfully was criticized for not wanting to actually engage and get in the mud and the muck to get more done than he was able to do. President Trump is even more you just feel like he has no sense of what should be in it. He's buffeted from one side to the next. These people, these different factions in the White House pit against each other, and one day he sides with one side and one day he sides. And so ultimately, he calls the Senate bill semi-irrelevant, which he's not wrong, to be frank. But if that's semi-irrelevant, he is completely and wholly irrelevant at this point. All right, more Rising for you after this.